Welcome everybody to another Q&A. I'm going to do this first half alone, and we'll do just the endocrine or the steroid questions on this one, and then I'll do the diet and exercise ones with Nick in a couple days. So the first question, these questions, to anyone that doesn't know, the questions are coming from Instagram. I'm most active on there. If you want to ask me a question, I post these in my stories once a week. You can just ask a question. I ask that everyone just ask one question, just to keep the volume of them down. So question number one, preferred estrogen management strategy on testosterone only, doses, AI of choice, and E2 numbers. So a lot of this is individual, so I can't really give specific information as I don't know this person. Test only, so that means we're not going to be adding any other anabolics to deal with this. You're just looking for an AI. Arimidex seems to be the most efficient and preferred AI of choice. Aromasin doesn't really seem to do a ton in practice. On paper, it seems okay. I've not seen a lot of guys have success with Aromasin. Letrozole seems a little bit harsh for this sort of thing. Ideally, keep your estrogen in range. There's just no need to run it super elevated or crush it. Just right in the middle. I don't know why everyone needs to be so extreme with this stuff. Just keep it in the middle, and you will get the best results. You'll look the best. Your blood pressure will be normal. Your water retention will be under control. So, and that's really, there are exceptions to this. I'm not going to speak in absolutes, but for most likely anyone who's asking me this question is probably not running 3 grams of gear, and they're not a professional bodybuilder. So if you're a normal guy that's just running a test only cycle, ideally you keep your estrogen in range. The next question is, recently I spoke about some bad interactions between Adex or Arimidex and Tamoxifen. Do I care to go into detail? The short story is basically just Arimidex. Tamoxifen will reduce the effectiveness of Arimidex, so you're just not supposed to combine them. I don't know why bodybuilding coaches do that. I would use one or the other if you really need both, which again, I would revisit the whole strategy if you feel like you need both. Letrozole and tamoxifen can be combined, but not Arimidex. Next question. Using Lantus to mitigate high blood glucose from GH and food in the off season, will it worsen sensitivity? Insulin questions are tough. Again, it's a lot of individual and there's a lot of risk. I know people don't seem to understand that there's a lot of risk using insulin. I'd have to see your A1C and your fasting glucose and stuff to know. Lantus is generally not the ideal solution here. I would probably reduce the GH dose first if your glucose is really getting high from GH and staying that way. Yes, and any insulin use, contrary to popular belief, any insulin use by someone who's not diabetic will worsen insulin sensitivity and over time cause insulin dependence, meaning you will end up being on insulin or becoming diabetic. Whether it happens immediately or long term, I can't say, but it's really something that people need to take into consideration seriously before they go down that road. And most people that I encounter do not need to be adding insulin. Their food isn't high enough. They're not anywhere near their genetic limit. It's really used as a tool when you've really run out of runway and you need to push farther. Most guys just aren't eating enough, training hard enough, or big enough that they really require this level of supplementation. Huge PIP or post-injection pain from sub-Q test E at a concentration of 500 milligrams per ml. I know it was dumb. 1 week, still not passed. How to solve this? So on a side note, I would stay away from anything that's over a 300 milligram per ml concentration, as their single ester testosterone will generally not stay in solution at 500 milligrams per ml. It would have to generally be a combined, like an E and a C combined, or a propionate and an E, or propionate and C. Or ethyl oleate or some toxic solvent is used in order to keep that liquid. So again, just you're not really saving anything by using these crazy mega dosed concentration things. I put ice on it, Motrin. I mean, and also, why would you be injecting that much testosterone or anything sub-Q? That I don't know. You don't need to be injecting testosterone sub-Q unless you're on T or T. And still then it's not required. That's just another strategy. But, steroid cycles are not injected subcutaneously. Combo of high volume training, high carbs, and insulin. Paul Barnett said it's magic. Okay, so if Paul Barnett said it's magic, then we're going to go with it's magic. I don't do high volume training or use insulin. I do eat a lot of carbs though. So we're going to default to Paul here. Paul said it's magic. It is magic. During a cut, not in prep though, how do you know when it's time to titrate anabolics, which specifically he said test and Primoval and up? When body composition no longer seems to be improving or recovery is suffering, right? If you have no other metric like more like actual recovery, like sleep, days off, those kind of things that you can easily manipulate. If recovery and muscle loss or muscle soreness is starting to occur, then it could be time to titrate the gear up depending on where you are and what the other scenarios are. Again, it's not an absolute statement. I'd have to see the whole picture. Let's see. What do you think about high-tech pharma? They sell steroids and pills. Thoughts? I can't speak to any underground labs. I don't have any clue about high-tech pharma or any of the other ones. Sorry. I wish I could help more there. Maybe ask someone else who you know, however you found the source, ask people that you know that might have used it. Skip the exercise ones. When to start supplementing with T4 on high dose of growth hormone. Okay, so again, not going to make an absolute statement here, but I would say use labs. So is T4 truly low? If it is, then what's T3? Because even if T4 is low, but T3 output is still fine, it doesn't mean that you've run out of necessarily enough substrate. You're just efficient at converting it. So T4 basically can be looked at like the idle in a car. It's kind of just your body's natural set point for that. Really what matters is the T3, right? And reverse T3. So if T3 is still fine, I wouldn't be adding thyroid medicine. In the old school theory of you had to use T4 with growth hormone is not accurate. Thoughts on muscle memory. So this is more kind of a training one, but a little deeper than that. So I believe the muscle memory can occur. They thought for a long time that it had to do with mitochondrial density, and that's been disproven. So it looks like the mitochondria you build over time from training, and then when you are detrained, the mitochondria go away again. So no one's actually sure of the mechanism here, but it does seem to occur. What that is, no scientist that I'm aware of actually can tell you what causes that. How to address gyno from growth hormone. No anabolic steroid changes. Same E2, but gyno starting when GH was added. Okay, so a little information about gyno. So for most guys, gyno can start or get worse when estrogen levels increase. That being said, gyno will only occur if progesterone receptors are activated, androgen receptors are activated, estrogen receptors are activated, and IGF-1 receptors are activated. That doesn't mean that a supraphysiological dose of any of those drugs needs to be in place. It just means that for your specific body, that you've met the threshold of tolerance for any one of those things, and they're all there together. If you were to remove one, like in a rat, if we do a knockout of one of those receptors, gyno will not occur. So by adding the growth hormone, you have most likely just increased your IGF-1. So the other things were already at threshold, and you just managed to push it over. The other thing people need to understand about serum estradiol is not the whole story. Serum estradiol is basically what's been spit out of the cell as waste. So you can have what looks like regular E2 on paperwork, and yet your estrogen and estrogen side effects can still be elevated because what is actually occurring inside the cell is a different story. There are specific testing that can be done for that. It's a little more expensive and complicated. If this is something that you need help with, you reach out to me on Instagram and I can explain that more. Would someone that aromatizes heavily be likely to need an AI on a 1-to-1 ratio of testosterone and equipoise in the off season? Yes, you could. I mean, does EQ's metabolism, like every other drug, the way it metabolizes is, there are known pathways, but they're controlled by your genetics and things like cytochrome P450, which is the gene that's an enzyme that basically controls how we metabolize all drugs, and that varies from person to person. And although classically EQ can be shown to crush E2 because it's possibly raising estrone or E1, doesn't mean that it's going to do that as in a predictable manner in every single person. So sure, it's possible, and it also depends on the dose and the person. If you're running 3 grams of testosterone, Is it possible you still need an AI? Yeah, it's definitely possible. Um, Proper way to store growth hormone before reconstituting it. Uh, most modern growth hormone, as long as it's kept in the, in relatively dark and dry, cool room temperature environment, is totally fine before reconstituting. Once it's been reconstituted, it needs to be refrigerated, and then it needs to be disposed of after 30 days. Let's look here. So we got, if you're training 2 times a day, would 5 milligrams Cialis pre-workout be excessive? If it's 5 milligrams once a day, I'd say no. If you were taking it twice a day and that's actually 10 milligrams, probably. I would say what would be the benefit there? You're probably starting to increase side effects at some point there. I would just use it once a day at that point. Okay, skipping over the food ones. Cardio. When taken supraphysiological levels of T3, how to taper off? And is it possible to cause thyroid shutdown from taking T3? Yes. Thyroid medicine is not to be screwed with. Thyroid medicine is serious. I wouldn't, it's one of those things that I definitely would not self-medicate with. You should be seeing an endocrinologist. The standard, again, I'm not going to speak to the individual because I don't know the person, but there's really 3 standard ways to come off thyroid medicine. You would cut the original dose in half and start of week 1, and then altogether come off at week 2, depending on, again, the dose, the duration, and what the impact on your body is. The second option is cut the original dose in half and take it for 4 weeks, then cut that dose in half and take it for another 4 weeks until you reach 12.5 micrograms a day or less, then stop. So if that's for someone who's using a higher dose. And the third option is cut the original dose in half, take that for 2 months, and then stop. Or cut the original dose by 25 micrograms every 2 months, stopping no later than 6 months. So that's the last option. That's for someone who's on a very large dose of T3. But in any of these options, though, you'd probably want to see a doctor, though, and get some labs done in this process and discuss with them what their opinion is with your personal situation. Thoughts on HGH 3 to 4 times per week when cutting? I know it's common on moderate doses. Okay, so really the 2 common standard, well, let's say the standard way to use growth hormone is 7 days a week. The 5 on, 2 off, I've said this a million times. I have probably 5 to 10 videos on growth hormone. I wrote an entire book on growth hormone. If people need a ton more information on growth hormone, they should probably look at some of the other stuff that's already out there. But the standard way to take growth hormone is 7 days a week. The 5 on, 2 off method was done in the 90s when growth hormone was very expensive. There's no science behind that. You're not preventing any sort of pituitary shutdown by doing that. It was for cost or availability or both. In AIDS, when side effects are experienced, it's that same thing that's given 7 days a week, whole dose, sub-Q, before bed. When side effects are experienced, the dose is not reduced. The frequency is reduced to every other day. The IGF-1 response is still similar, not the same. And because we're really relying on IGF in that situation and not growth hormone effects, it doesn't really matter for them. That being said, if you're looking at cutting, you're looking for both the growth hormone effects and the IGF effects. So using it 3 or 4 times a week is not super efficient because you're constantly losing the growth hormone effect. You're really just relying on the residual IGF elevation. And so no. So you'd be better off using a smaller moderate dose and using it daily than you would be using a gigantic dose 3 times a week. I'm guessing this is a cost or supply issue. If that's the case, I would, do what I just said and use a smaller dose a little more frequently. Using TUDCA during a blast, do or don't? TUDCA, helps with bile flow. If you're not using orals, which I wouldn't recommend it during a blast, really anytime, not really necessary unless you're having digestion issues. Not something that I think most people need to deal with. But it's not going to cause harm. The next question is, how much do compounds like Masteron, Proviron, and Primo really help lower estrogen? And is it enough not to use an AI? Again, it's a very personal question. It's really hard to say, both between your drug use, your experience, your body, and some generic variability. Those drugs all kind of vary in their methods of how the mechanisms of how they do this. Generally, relatively minor, estrogen control from them. I would, in my opinion, I think an AI comes first before you're trying to use a DHT. Adding more drugs in that don't necessarily do as good of a job. So Masteron can be hit or miss. Proviron would be a very low effect with that. Primo, it does affect your estrogen. It shouldn't be crushing your estrogen. Generally, when it does that, it's probably EQ that's been subbed in for real Primo. But if your estrogen is still elevated and you're using these DHTs, then yes, use an AI. Let's see if there's any more here. Okay. Is HGH pre-workout pinned IM in the muscle to be trained better than AM PM sub-Q? No. So that's done sometimes with Increlux, IGF. It takes 4 to 6 hours to absorb HGH. So using it specifically pre-workout with an effect, with hoping for some sort of acute effect after workout or during workout, is total waste. And people need to understand that the IM sub-Q thing, there are certain drugs that need to be used this way. GH can technically be used both ways, but that being said, it's not that if you inject GH into your bicep, it's not that it's just going to act on your bicep. It just has to still enter circulation like testosterone would, and still go that route. It just enters faster. Now, it might interact with some receptors in the bicep or whatever muscle you're pinning in to some degree, but is that really what's occurring? No. When IGF is different, GH should be used sub-Q, should be used, the timing doesn't matter so much. The food doesn't really matter so much. Don't be using it acutely around exercise. That doesn't make a difference. If you're trying to do fasted cardio in the morning, use your growth hormone at night before bed. So it takes hours before it's in your bloodstream. See if there's any else. That looks like it for hormone stuff. So we will be back with Nick in 2 days, and we will answer all these exercise and nutrition questions. I appreciate everyone for following, liking, subscribing, and the support you guys give me. Thank you so much. I will see you guys soon. Take care.